Welcome, everybody, to the Alyosha Society, where we're pursuing truth and beauty and goodness through great literature. This, my friends, is a super exciting video. It's another one of those landmark videos. Why? This is the first video of our first book in the new course, Great Books for Modern. Everything we're doing in this course is going to be after World War I. As you probably figured out by now, we're starting with Animal Farm. In the Great Books 3 course, we started with Pilgrim's Progress and the English Civil War, covered that whole time period. Ended up doing Rousseau's Social Contract, Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, Gulliver's Travels. What else did we do? Jane Austen's Northanger Abbey, did some Dostoevsky and some poetry. And some Screwtape Letters at the end of that course. This is Great Books 4. We'll start around the time of World War I, the Russian Revolution, and move on from there. My name is Bruce Etter. I'm the founder of the Alyosha Society, and I am glad you're here. So let's go ahead and get started. I try, sometimes unsuccessfully, but I do try to keep the videos around 20 minutes. You can ask anyone. I'm going to tell you up front, anyone who took the Great Books 3 course, do I always do that? No, absolutely not. But that's kind of the aim. And when we are starting a new book, I am always going to show you a slide that looks like this. So you know exactly how many videos we're going to be doing. And then if you're meeting in the Monday night class, of course, we meet on Monday nights from 8 to 9:30, and we talk about what you've been reading and do all kinds of other games and quizzes and discussion boards and so forth. The Animal Farm, we're going to do 5 videos. This one's going to be entirely introduction. You'll see why very soon. And then you can see right there which chapters we're doing in which video. So what you want to do, friends, is read those chapters at least before you watch that video. And then when we meet on Zoom during the week, that's what we'll be talking about. So there it is. There's the layout for Animal Farm. Now, speaking of videos that I've been making you watch, have you watched this one? It's very important that you watch the critical theory video, understanding how to interpret literature, because I'm going to be using language and concepts and ideas from this video. And so please, 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 you don't have to stop this one necessarily now and go back. That wouldn't be a bad idea, but just make sure that you've checked out this one. There's a couple of others, How to Enjoy a Novel, and I may be forgetting one. But anyway, the reason I ask is, does this look familiar? Do you remember this from that video? The keys to understanding a book. You're going to hear the phrase historical biographical approach over and over and over. That is the methodology. That's the approach that we're taking in this course to understanding literature. And that has to do with doing a little bit of due diligence before you read the book and finding out as much as you can about the author. Why did this person write this book? To whom was he or she writing? When did it have a historical context? What's the genre and so forth? But I'm going to explain that. I'm going to talk through all of that as we go along. Keep in mind, friends, that these courses I'm doing, yes, they are focusing on the content of the books. Of course they are. That's the fun part. But what we're also doing is focusing on giving you the tools to better understand any book. So we're using this particular book, and I want to say, okay, I want to teach you how to grab the tools out of the toolbox. My dad taught me when I was 15 years old how to change the brake pads on the car and how to change the oil and do things like that. I would watch him. I would see what tools he would use, and then I was able to do it on my own. That's what I want to do with you in the world of literature. And we'll be talking about the literary toolbox quite a bit. Speaking of which, man, the timing here is uncanny. Now, the key for me is usually when I'm viewing PowerPoint slides is trying to figure out where can I put my video? Let me try upper left and let's see if that works. Okay, so the literary toolbox, there is another video. And I should have already asked you to watch the literary toolbox video. If not, it's on my YouTube channel, the Alyosha Society. Please go there and watch it because I'm doing a bit of an abbreviated version here to introduce Animal Farm. So what is the literary toolbox? Well, first of all, it's really just that. It's learning, it's a skill, learning how to use a tool to better understand a book. The first one is the historical context. What is this book about? Was it written in the 15th century? Was it written about the 15th century? You kind of sort of need to learn both. If it was written in a different century than the century in which the story takes place, you got to figure out as much as you can about that immediate historical context. Otherwise, and guys, that is more true with Animal Farm than just about anything you're going to read. And we will do that. We will dig into the historical context, but we also need to learn biographical context. That means learning as much about the author as we can. So we'll be learning as much as we can about George Orwell. Who was he? When did he grow up? Where did he spend his time? What were his likes and dislikes? All of those things are going to kind of funnel in and give us some insight to better understand the book. Then there are what I call genre questions. So we'll figure out what genre the book is. The word genre just means type or kind. So is the book an essay? Is it a poem? Is it a biography? Is it an autobiography? Is it a satire or an allegory? Whatever. So then we'll ask, then I'll have a standard set of questions that we'll kind of walk through for each genre. So then in the future, when you read another book of the same genre, you kind of sort of know what questions to ask, what to look for. Now, literary devices, we'll be talking about those later. That would be what tools does the author, him or herself, use in enhancing the story? Maybe the author uses some kind of repetition or alliteration, or maybe the author uses, let's say, like Dostoevsky, uses colors to represent ideas or themes. Maybe the author plants something in chapter 1 or 2 or 3 that's kind of looking forward to something that's going to happen later. That's called a foreshadowing. These are all literary devices. So we want to learn about those as much as we can. And then we're going to have what's called the plot arc. You may be familiar with the plot arc, and we'll look at that later. But it's just sort of the 5 stages that most plots go through. And so if you're able to know what those are and then identify, oh, we're at this point in the plot arc in the story, we haven't gotten to the climax yet, or, the resolution, whatever the case may be. So that's the literary toolbox. So we said we were going to do it. Let's do it. George Orwell. I'm going to stick myself right over here. I will be covering up George Orwell's forehead. I hope that's okay. All right. First of all, his name was not George Orwell. Did you know that? Yeah, George Orwell was a pen name, or as some people call it, a pseudonym, a fake name. He was writing about controversial topics, and sometimes people do that when they're writing about topics that, could cause a stir. His name was actually Eric Arthur Blair, and he was born, as you can see there on the screen. Eric Arthur Blair was born in 1903, son of a British civil servant. Now, what that means, you may or may not know that the British Empire was vast in the 19th and early 20th century. It spanned all over the globe, little provinces here and there and colonies and so forth. And if you were a civil servant for the British Empire, then that likely meant that you may be traveling to places like Burma, modern day Myanmar, or India, or again, in this case, he was born in India. If you're wondering, wait a second, if he's British, why was he born in India? British Empire. All right. During this time, Britain owns a lot of land around the world. Well, he came back to England when he was 1, so he doesn't remember that year, of course. Started writing at an early age, published a poem when he was 11 years old. I don't know how many 11-year-olds are poets, but Orwell had an interest in writing from an early age. He himself decided to join the India Imperial Police Force in 1922. Now, that's not an odd or unusual thing. He was used to a sort of international lifestyle from his own father. And so take a note when you see dates, do the math. How old is he? Well, it looks to me like he's 19 years old. Still a young guy. 5 years later, he leaves Burma, goes back to England. Ooh, that writing bug is biting again. So 27, he's 24 years old, and he realizes at this point that that's what he wants to do, you know. But as Orwell is observing international affairs and what's going on in the world, he wrote a novel called Burmese Days, in which he's actually writing in opposition to British imperialism. That is the idea that, that Great Britain is conquering all these lands around the world and colonizing and then bringing in, financial benefit to benefit their economy from these foreign lands. In 1934, he wrote a novel against that. Ooh, so what does that tell you? That tells you that George Orwell was not only a writer. Okay, he wasn't just someone who wanted to write for the sake of writing. He had a political agenda. Yeah, he was passionate. Nothing wrong with that. He was passionate about politics. I wonder if that could have anything to do with Animal Farm. Yeah, of course it does. Moving right along, 1936. Now, this is a fascinating one. His involvement in global politics led him at the age of 33 to fight against Franco in the Spanish Civil War. So now Orwell is really starting to formulate his ideas about what does he believe about the role of government. We talked about this last year in Great Books 3 with Rousseau and so forth. That's what Orwell's kind of struggling with here. So that's 1936. His views are forming. Now I'm kind of leaving you in suspense a little bit and keeping it somewhat generic because I want to hold off and just let it kind of percolate a little bit. What were his political views? All right, we'll get to that. He married Eileen in 1936. So again, he's 33 years old. He takes a job with the BBC in 1941. Now think about that again. When you see a year on a timeline, ask yourself, what was going on during that time? Oh, right in the middle of World War II. All right, this is right at the time when Hitler was seeking to, invade, Poland and Czechoslovakia and eventually France and take over Europe. So in this context, right, the end of World War II, George Orwell writes Animal Farm. What is Animal Farm about? We'll get to that. Then 4 years later, he writes another blockbuster. I mean, if you think Animal Farm is popular, the novel 1984 is one of the most well-known novels of all time by any author. And Orwell wrote both of these novels within a 4-year time period. So it's pretty remarkable the impact that these two novels have had. And it seems like, he sort of had these ideas really flowing in the 1940s. And then he died in 1950. Now, again, do the math. He's born in 1903. Whoa, Mr. Etter. He was really young when he died. Yeah. I hope you think that's young because he died when he was 47. And I'll just tell you this, I'm not 47. I'm quite a bit older than that. Yeah, so definitely that's young. So that's Orwell. So that, you see, my friends, historical biographical approach to understanding a story. The first thing we want to do is get to know the author. Now, guys, if you're digging in to a novel on your own, you'd probably go a lot deeper than this. I like to read entire biographies of my favorite authors, so I really can dive into their thinking, their mindset, their intentions, and the novel then ends up making a lot more sense to me when I do that. Okay, no more suspense. What were his actual beliefs? Okay, let's move me. First of all, he was an atheist. That's important. That's important to know. He was an atheist, but he attended the Anglican Church. Tradition, comfort level, whatever the case may be. But the important point here is that he himself was an atheist. What did he believe about politics? Because that's what his books are about. Democratic socialism. Oh, wait a second. Some of you are thinking, wait, Mr. Etter, I thought that he wrote Animal Farm against socialism / communism. Not really. No, that's kind of a common misconception. That's why we're learning about Orwell before we dive into the book. We'll talk about that later. But he is not writing generally against socialism and communism. He was himself a democratic socialist. What does that mean? Well, we're going to be talking about Karl Marx in the next video. So video number 2, we're going to look at the Communist Manifesto and what was Marxism and how is Marxism connected to socialism and communism and so forth. But in a nutshell, let me just share this now. Marx's goal was to create a classless society. What do you mean? People that don't like Beethoven? No, I don't mean that kind of class. I mean, literally like social classes, upper class, lower class, middle class. No. We all want to be on the same level playing field, and where the government owns the means of production and everyone's income would be sort of regulated so that we're all basically kind of equal. He was definitely opposed to capitalism. If you're not familiar with what capitalism is, that's kind of what we do for the most part here in the United States. We are capitalists. What does that mean? It means that you as a private citizen can own your own business. You can own your own property. You can make your own money, and you can build as much wealth as you want. George Orwell believed that capitalism only led to exploitation. It only hurt the common man, the lower classes. We'll debate and discuss all of that later. For now, I just kind of want you to know what he believed. But here's the thing. He may have been a democratic socialist, but he opposed totalitarianism. Oh, okay. Totalitarianism, what does that mean? That means when either one dude or a small group of dudes running a country or overthrow a government and take over a country and rule it with absolute power, no checks and balances, nobody else gets any power. No, forget about a parliament, forget about a Congress, forget about any other branches. You've got the totalitarian leader is the firm, harsh dictator who rules with an iron fist. So of course, Orwell was opposed to that, but he also opposed what his own nation was involved in, which was imperialism. That means empire building in other places of the world. Hey, look, if you want to have your own country and build your own, system and wealth and all that, that's fine. But building your empire and extending your empire by exploiting and conquering and colonizing other parts of the world, Orwell was definitely opposed to that. And of course, as I said earlier, the abuses of capitalism. So there is something I want to give you a quote that Orwell himself wrote in a preface to the book we're reading here, Animal Farm, he said that this book is not condemning socialism. It's trying to separate socialism from Soviet communism and allow for a revival of socialism. So, you know, a lot of times folks kind of jump on board with books like Animal Farm or 1984, and they're like, yeah, go anti-communist and socialist and yay capitalism. That's not what Orwell's doing here. He's kind of doing some fine-tuning, opposing definitely what happened in the Russian Revolution. But he would have been in favor of a form of socialism. All right, where am I? How do I get myself out of the way? Oh, yes. Now let's go to our genre questions. Keys to understanding a book. What genre is this? Oh, it's a little bit like Narnia, isn't it? I mean, it's kind of a lot like Narnia. Talking animals. The animals represent, you know, other things or other individuals. Yeah, it's a little bit like the, you know, the Lion, Witch, and Wardrobe, the Narnia series. And that's what we call an allegory. An allegory. What is an allegory? Well, an allegory is a story that operates on two different levels. There are, you know, talking animals on a farm here. So you could tell this story to a child and they would think it's kind of cute and funny, and you could draw pictures and color in a coloring book, and that would be cute and fun. But the allegory operates on a higher level. The animals in the story, and even the humans, represent actual humans who lived in history. And it's all revolving around Karl Marx, Joseph Stalin, and the key players, Trotsky and so forth, involved in the Russian Revolution. So there you go. More on all this later. This is just our introductory video. Okay. And there we have it. We went over some of our historical context. We have now looked at a little bit of the biography of the author. We have identified the genre. We'll come back to literary devices and the plot arc. Ah, what's in red here? Ooh, genre questions. Okay. Well, when you're reading an allegory, remember, an allegory is simply a story that operates on multiple levels. First of all, can you identify for sure that it is an allegory? Just because, you know, Billy Bob told you it's an allegory, you probably shouldn't take Billy Bob's word for it. Do some digging. Did the author himself or herself say it was an allegory? Is it universally recognized as an allegory? You can rest assured Animal Farm is. But again, remember, I'm giving you tools to use in everything that you read. So if you come across another book that you think might be an allegory, you ask these questions. Why? Why did the author choose an allegory to make his or her point? We'll do that. We'll do that as we go through our videos and we walk through the story. We'll answer the question, why didn't Orwell just write an essay? Why didn't he write a poem? Why didn't he put it up on a billboard somewhere? I mean, you know, there's a lot of things you can do to get your message across. Why did he choose talking animals? Okay. How do you identify what each character represents? Ooh, yeah. So when I tell you that Old Major represents Karl Marx, how do we know that? That's kind of a tricky one, you know? We'll talk about it. These are good questions to ask. Is the author writing from a Christian worldview? Is the author writing from an Eastern worldview, a Buddhist worldview? In this case, we've already answered that question. We said George Orwell was an atheist. So, okay, that's going to be important. That's going to be really important. Understanding what an atheist believes about the nature of man is going to come into play when we look at that thinker's views on what government is best. Ooh, that's gonna be fun. How does the author's worldview impact the way you interpret the allegory? Absolutely. Already kind of hinted at that. Now, is the message that the writer is trying to communicate, is it meant to express that a certain thing is good or that another thing is bad or both? See, that's where there's already been confusion about Animal Farm. Is George Orwell trying to say that socialism is bad or that communism is bad? Not exactly. It's just not that simple. And we'll deal with that as we go through. Okay, so there you have it. Back to the literary toolbox. We've done the historical context. We've looked at some biographical material. We've answered the genre questions. And we'll probably do literary devices in another video. But I at least want to mention elements of a plot. If you've never taken any of my courses, what do I mean by that? Well, what I mean by elements of a plot is every single story you read may not look quite this neat. I'm trying to get myself out of the way here, guys. Let me just put myself in the middle. But stories do tend to follow this, what I call the plot arc, or this looks more like a plot mountain. So it starts all the way on the left-hand side with number one, with exposition. So that's just the writer is introducing the story. You know, once upon a time, just get the characters kind of established. Then there's usually some sort of problem that emerges. That's what we call the rising action. And then the story comes to a head, so to speak. There's this climactic moment where there's some dramatic incident that happens, some point of action, greatest suspense. It's like a turning point. Most good stories have a climactic moment. And then after that, it's sort of the aftermath of the climax, what we call the falling action. What happens after this big climactic moment? Falling action, and then notice it smooths out. In the end, there's a resolution. So, the resolution doesn't necessarily have to be everybody lives happily ever after, but it is the end. It's the end of the story, and the conflicts have been dealt with, at least in one way or another. And again, guys, this is every story is not going to follow this pattern exactly, and all resolutions may not be satisfying to you. This is just the very basic general outline of the plot arc. So what we'll do as we read Animal Farm is see if we can identify, well, where are we at different points of the story. Whoo, well, guys, I feel like I just asked you to back up and hold on, and I just unleashed a fire hose on you of information. So we'll pause it right there. This was our introductory video number 1. Be sure that you read chapters 1 through 3 before you watch the next video, and I'll see you then, friends.